I've owned my cabin in the mountains for almost 15 years. It's my escape, a quiet retreat away from the noise of the city, surrounded by pine trees, fresh air, and the kind of silence you can almost hear. The HOA in my area has always been a pain, but I kept my head down and followed the rules. The president of the HOA, Karen, was, well, the textbook definition of a Karen. Short blonde hair, oversized sunglasses, and a permanent scowl like she was allergic to other people's happiness. Last month, I had planned a 2-week business trip out of state. I locked the cabin, turned off the utilities, and let the HOA know I'd be away, just in case they needed to reach me. The trip was supposed to be long and exhausting, but after a few days, my meetings wrapped up earlier than expected. I figured, why not surprise myself with a few extra days of peace at the cabin? When I pulled into the long gravel driveway, I immediately noticed something was wrong. There were 3 cars parked outside, none of them mine. The one in the front had a "Proud HOA Member" bumper sticker, and I didn't even need to guess whose it was. My stomach tightened. As I stepped closer, I could hear laughter and music coming from inside. My porch was cluttered with coolers, folding chairs, and, I kid you not, a plastic kiddie pool filled with water. The kind of chaos you'd expect at a 4th of July barbecue, not at my private property. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, only to freeze. The place looked like a family reunion was in full swing. Kids were running around with juice boxes, adults were lounging on my furniture, and the kitchen counter was covered with half-eaten food and beer bottles. My framed photographs had been moved to make space for paper plates. Then I saw her, Karen, standing in my kitchen like she owned the place. She was wearing a wide-brimmed hat, barking orders to a man I assumed was her husband, and acting like this was her cabin. When she finally noticed me, she didn't look embarrassed. She looked annoyed. "Oh, you're back early," she said, as if I had just crashed her party. "You should have told me." I was too stunned to speak for a second. "Told you? Karen, what the hell are you doing in my cabin?" She crossed her arms, like she was preparing for battle. "Your HOA fees cover community access to vacant properties during emergencies. And since you were gone, I decided my family could use this space for a little getaway. You weren't using it, so it's not a big deal." "A little getaway?" My blood was boiling. "This is trespassing. Get your family out. Now." That's when she smirked, pulled out her phone, and said, "You can't talk to me like that. I'm calling the cops. You're making a scene and harassing us." It took me a second to process the insanity of the situation. She had broken into my cabin, and somehow I was the problem? I laughed in disbelief, but before I could say another word, she was already on the phone, telling the dispatcher that a hostile man had entered her vacation rental and was threatening her family. Within 15 minutes, 2 police cars pulled into my driveway. Karen stood on the porch like a queen awaiting her knights, pointing at me the moment they stepped out. "Officers, that's him. He broke in and tried to throw us out," she declared, voice dripping with fake fear. The officers looked at me, then at her, clearly confused. But what happened next would leave even the cops stunned, and it was just the beginning of a battle that would make national headlines. The 2 officers stepped toward me, their hands resting on their belts, eyes scanning the scene. Karen was already in full performance mode, shaky voice, hand to her chest, painting herself as the victim of some dangerous intruder. "Sir, we got a call about a possible break-in," one officer said to me, his tone cautious but not yet hostile. "Can we see some identification?" "Absolutely," I replied, pulling out my wallet. "This is my cabin. I have the deed, the driver's license, everything you need to prove it." Karen scoffed loudly behind me. "He's lying. This cabin belongs to the HOA while he's away. We have the right to use it. My family's been here for 3 days without any trouble until he showed up." The way she said he made it sound like I was some stray animal that wandered in. The officers exchanged a quick look, clearly unsure. I could tell they were trying to figure out if this was just a neighbor dispute or an actual crime. "Ma'am," the taller officer said to Karen, "do you have any paperwork proving that this property belongs to the HOA?" Karen's lips curled into a smug smile. "Of course I do. The HOA charter allows the use of unoccupied residences for community needs." That was a flat-out lie, and I knew it. But before I could jump in, she produced a laminated document from her oversized purse, the so-called HOA charter she was always waving around at meetings like it was the Constitution. The officer took it, scanned the lines, then frowned slightly. "This doesn't say anything about taking over someone's home." Karen's tone shifted instantly, going from fake friendly to icy. "Are you calling me a liar? Do you have any idea who I am in this community?" Oh, they were about to find out. I stepped forward, my voice steady but boiling with anger. "Officers, check the locks. I can show you my security camera footage. I have an alert from 3 days ago, them walking in here with suitcases." Karen's husband, who had been silently leaning against the wall until now, suddenly piped up. He's exaggerating. We had a key. That caught the officer's attention. You had a key? Yes, Karen jumped in. We borrowed it from the HOA office for maintenance purposes. I couldn't help but laugh out loud. Maintenance? You mean stocking my fridge with beer and trashing my living room? The shorter officer's eyes narrowed. Ma'am, if you don't have a legal right to be here, this is trespassing. That's when Karen went nuclear. I'm the HOA president. I am the legal authority here. She spun toward the officers, her voice rising. And if you don't remove this man from the property immediately, I'll have both of you written up for misconduct. The officers froze, caught between doing their job and dealing with a local power-hungry busybody. But instead of backing down, the taller one looked at me and said quietly, Sir, if you have proof, now's the time to show it. I walked over to my desk drawer, pulled out my laptop, and brought up the security footage. The timestamp clearly showed Karen, her husband, and 3 kids walking in, hauling luggage, bags of groceries, and a box of wine. The officers watched in silence. When the clip ended, the taller one turned to Karen. Ma'am, I think we need to step outside and have a talk. But Karen didn't budge. Instead, she stepped closer to me, lowering her voice so only I could hear. You're making a huge mistake. You go through with this, and I'll make sure your life here becomes hell. She had no idea that the hell was about to start for her. Karen stood there, practically vibrating with rage, while the officers reviewed the security footage for a second time, as if they wanted to be absolutely certain what they were seeing. The screen didn't lie. There was Karen, her oversized sun hat casting a shadow over her smug grin, marching into my cabin like she owned it. Behind her, her husband carried a cooler the size of a small refrigerator, and her kids trailed in with grocery bags swinging from their arms. The taller officer finally closed my laptop with a soft click and looked at Karen. Ma'am, the footage is clear. You entered without the owner's permission, stayed for several days, and brought belongings with the intent to occupy the property. That's trespassing. Karen's face flushed a deep shade of crimson. It's not trespassing. I told you, I have authority from the HOA. Authority you cannot prove, the officer cut in, his voice sharper now. And even if your HOA had some kind of policy, which it clearly doesn't, it wouldn't override private property rights. Karen crossed her arms and narrowed her eyes at him. Do you know how many friends I have in this county? Do you know the kind of calls I can make? The officer's jaw tightened. Ma'am, I don't care how many people you know. The law is the law. While they went back and forth, I glanced around my cabin, my anger building with every detail I noticed. My grandfather's antique fishing rod, the one I kept mounted above the fireplace, was leaning in the corner with a frayed line dangling from it. My favorite leather armchair had a juice stain the size of a baseball. And the smell, my God, the smell. Somewhere in here, something had gone bad. I turned to Karen. You didn't just break in. You trashed my home. Karen's husband finally spoke up, trying to sound reasonable. Look, maybe we can work something out. It's not like we hurt anything on purpose. You think this is negotiable? I snapped. You stole my key, you broke into my cabin, you hosted a 3-day vacation here, and now you want to work something out? The shorter officer moved toward the door. All right, everyone outside. We're going to get statements and figure out the next steps. Karen didn't move. She just stared at me with a strange smile, the kind of smile that said she still believed she was untouchable. You're making a mistake, she whispered. We all stepped outside into the crisp mountain air. Her kids were playing by the driveway, completely unaware of the tension. The officers separated us, one took me aside, the other took Karen and her husband. The taller officer, the one with me, asked for the full story. I told him everything, my early return from the trip, the strange cars in the driveway, the kiddie pool on my porch, and finally, the scene inside my cabin. I showed him the HOA notification email I'd sent before leaving, proof that I had informed them I'd be away, not giving permission to use the property. While I was talking, I noticed the shorter officer with Karen. She was gesturing wildly, pointing at me, and at one point, she even took off her sunglasses and dabbed at imaginary tears. Her husband just stood there, nodding along. Then the taller officer's radio crackled. A voice came through, dispatch confirming that there had been no legal authority filed for Karen or the HOA to access my property. In fact, the HOA had no such community use policy at all. The officers regrouped. The taller one addressed Karen, Ma'am, you and your family need to gather your belongings and leave the property immediately. If you refuse, we will have no choice but to take you into custody for criminal trespass. Karen's jaw dropped. You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president. That title doesn't mean a thing here, the officer replied. You've crossed the line. For a moment, I thought she might finally back down. But then, in true Karen fashion, she doubled down. If I'm leaving, I'm taking everything I brought, and everything I improved. I frowned. Improved? She pointed at my porch. That kiddie pool? That was my idea. And the new outdoor grill? We bought that, so it's coming with us. I couldn't believe the audacity. You mean the grill you're talking about, the one I bought last summer? She ignored me, barking orders to her husband to start loading the cars. Her kids whined, dragging bags and half-empty food containers out to the driveway. The officers stayed close, making sure they didn't take anything that wasn't theirs. But Karen, she was plotting something. I could see it in the way she kept glancing at me, that dangerous glint in her eyes. Finally, with their cars packed, Karen marched up to me, leaning in so close I could smell her overly sweet perfume. "Enjoy your little victory," she hissed. "Because by the time I'm done with you, this cabin will be mine." She climbed into her car, slammed the door, and sped off down the gravel road, kicking up dust behind her. The officers turned to me. "We'll file a full report. If you want to press charges, we'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow." I nodded, but inside, my mind was already racing. I knew Karen wouldn't just walk away from this. And I wasn't going to wait for her next move. What I didn't know was that her revenge plan had already begun, and the next time I saw her, she'd have the county on her side. I barely slept that night. Even though Karen and her family were gone, the cabin didn't feel the same. It was as if their presence had left a stain that no amount of cleaning could scrub away. I kept replaying her last words in my head, "By the time I'm done with you, this cabin will be mine." The next morning, I drove into town to the sheriff's station to file an official complaint. The same taller officer from yesterday greeted me at the front desk. He had the report ready, and all I had to do was sign it to press charges for trespassing, theft, and property damage. I was halfway through the paperwork when my phone buzzed. It was an email from the HOA. The subject line read, "Urgent, notice of violation, possible foreclosure proceedings." My heart sank. I opened the email, and my jaw nearly hit the floor. According to the report attached, I had violated multiple HOA bylaws. Failing to maintain my property to community standards. Allowing hazardous items, the unsafe kiddie pool, on my porch. Abandoning the property without proper authorization. Engaging in harassment toward HOA members. Guess who? At the bottom, it said my cabin could be subjected to foreclosure by the HOA if fines weren't paid in full within 60 days. The total fines? Over $14,000. I stormed back into the officer's office and showed him the email. He frowned but shook his head. "This is civil, not criminal. They can't just take your property without a court process. But it looks like they're trying to bury you in paperwork and legal fees." It didn't take a genius to figure out who was behind it. Karen had lost the battle yesterday, but she wasn't giving up, she was changing the battlefield. When I got back to the cabin, a shiny black SUV was parked in my driveway. Standing next to it was a man in a tailored suit holding a clipboard. "You the owner?" he asked. "Yeah," I said cautiously. "And you are?" "County Code Enforcement," he replied, flashing a badge. "We received multiple complaints about unsafe conditions, unauthorized structures, and possible zoning violations." I almost laughed. "Let me guess, the complaints came from a certain HOA president?" He didn't answer, just started taking photos, of my porch, my shed, even my firewood stack. "If these violations are confirmed," he said matter-of-factly, "you could be facing thousands in fines and even forced demolition of non-compliant structures." As he left, my phone rang again. This time, it was my insurance company. They'd received a tip that my cabin had been used for unauthorized commercial purposes, essentially accusing me of running an unlicensed rental business. My policy was now under review. Karen wasn't just trying to annoy me, she was trying to destroy me. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, I sat on my porch staring at the treeline, wondering how far she'd go. That's when I noticed movement in the distance. A figure, standing just beyond the edge of the woods, watching. It was too far to make out details, but I'd bet my life it was Karen. She didn't move for a full minute. Just stood there. Watching. Then she turned and disappeared into the trees. The next morning, I'd find out exactly why she was there, and it would push this war to a level I never imagined. The morning after I spotted that shadowy figure near the treeline, I woke up earlier than usual. Something about seeing Karen lurking there gnawed at me. My first thought was to check my security cameras again, but the cabin's Wi-Fi had gone down sometime during the night. That was odd, I'd paid the bill in advance before my trip. I stepped outside to reset the router, and that's when I noticed it, fresh tire tracks in the dirt just beyond my driveway, leading toward the woods. Not mine. Not from the code enforcement guy's SUV either. I followed them a few steps before realizing they disappeared into a barely visible trail I'd never seen before. That's when I heard voices, faint, but enough to make me freeze. "Just put it behind the shed," a woman's voice said. I didn't need to see her to know it was Karen. I crouched low and moved toward the sound. My property backed right up to a dense section of national forest, so there were plenty of places to hide. Through a gap in the trees, I spotted Karen and a man I didn't recognize unloading something from the back of a pickup truck. It was a large, dark trash bag, the kind you use for heavy yard waste. But whatever was inside didn't move like leaves or branches. It was solid. They dragged it behind my shed and covered it with an old tarp. "Perfect," Karen said, dusting off her hands. "When the sheriff sees this, he won't be asking questions. He'll be putting him in cuffs." I felt a chill crawl down my spine. She wasn't just filing bogus HOA violations anymore, she was planting evidence. I waited until they left, then hurried to the shed. My heart pounded as I lifted the tarp and tore open the bag. Inside was a stash of stolen power tools. High-end stuff. Drills, saws, even a generator. Every single one had bright orange spray paint on it, with a local construction company's logo barely visible underneath. She was setting me up for felony theft. I quickly dragged the whole bag into my cabin, locked the door, and called the sheriff. The dispatcher said an officer could be out later in the afternoon. That was fine, I wanted Karen caught red-handed. But Karen must have known I'd find the bag, because she wasn't done yet. Around noon, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, 2 deputies were standing there, different from the ones who came before. "Sir," one of them said, "we have a report of stolen property on these premises. Mind if we come in?" I smirked. "You mean the stolen property someone planted behind my shed?" They exchanged a look. "You're saying this was planted?" "Yes," I said, and I explained everything, the early morning sighting, the tire tracks, the voices, the bag, the tarp. I showed them where the bag had been and even pointed out Karen's boot prints in the soft dirt. The deputies photographed everything and took the bag as evidence. "If what you're saying checks out," one of them told me, "this could turn into a criminal investigation against her." That gave me a small sense of relief, but only for a moment. Because just as they were leaving, the shorter deputy paused and said, "You might want to be careful. Word around town is, Karen's been talking to a county commissioner she plays tennis with. She's claiming you're a dangerous man who threatened her family with a gun." I froze. "That's a lie." "Doesn't matter if it's a lie," he said. "If she pushes it, you could be facing a restraining order. And once that's in place, she can use it to get you removed from your own property." After they left, I sat on my porch staring at the empty gravel road, my mind racing. Karen wasn't just using the HOA anymore, she was pulling political strings. That night, as I was locking up, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Parked just far enough down the road to be almost out of sight was a car. Inside, the faint glow of a phone screen lit up a familiar silhouette. Karen was watching me again. Only this time, she wasn't alone. That night, I barely moved from the living room chair. I kept the lights low, watching through the thin curtain at that car parked down the road. Every now and then, the glow from a phone screen would light up 2 faces inside. One was definitely Karen, I could see her short blonde bob and the way she tilted her head when she laughed. The other face was a man's. Stocky build. Dark jacket. The kind of guy who looked like he could lift a refrigerator without breaking a sweat. Around midnight, the car finally pulled away. I thought that was the end of it, until the next morning. I woke to the sound of heavy boots on my porch. I grabbed my phone and peered through the peephole. The man from the car stood there, holding an envelope. "Yeah?" I called through the door. "You John Miller?" His voice was deep, calm, but carried a kind of weight that made me uneasy. "Depends who's asking. Name's Mark Henson. I'm a private investigator." That caught me off guard. He held up a business card through the glass. Sure enough, it read, "Mark Henson, licensed private investigator, State of Colorado. I've been hired by the HOA to gather evidence," he said. "Figured I'd be upfront with you." "Evidence for what?" He smirked. "You'll find out soon enough." I opened the door just enough to take the envelope. Inside was a formal letter from the HOA stating they were initiating an independent investigation into potential criminal activity on my property. The letter warned me not to interfere with their investigator, Mark, or I'd face additional legal consequences. Mark turned to leave, but then he stopped and looked me dead in the eye. "Off the record? Karen's not just trying to find you. She wants you gone. And she's willing to pay me triple to find something, anything, that'll stick." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because," he said, stepping closer, "I don't like her. And I don't like being used. You seem like a decent guy. But if you've got skeletons in your closet, now's the time to bury them deep." With that, he walked off. For the rest of the day, I noticed him popping up in strange places, parked at the edge of my property, pretending to take photos of trees, strolling past my cabin with a camera slung over his neck. He was good at making it look casual, but I could feel his eyes on me the whole time. By late afternoon, I'd had enough. I decided to confront Karen directly. I drove into town to the HOA office, a sleek building that looked out of place in our rustic mountain community. Karen was inside, wearing her usual smug grin. "Well, look who decided to crawl in," she said sweetly. "Here to pay your fines?" "Cut the act," I snapped. "I know about your little setup behind my shed. The sheriff's got the evidence. And now you've got some PI sniffing around my property? This ends now." Her smile only widened. "Oh, John, you really don't get it, do you? This isn't about your shed. Or the fines. Or even the cabin." She leaned in close. "It's about control. And I always win." Before I could respond, Mark walked in. But he wasn't looking at Karen, he was looking at me. "John," he said slowly, "we need to talk. Privately." The look in his eyes wasn't hostile. It was urgent. I followed him outside, and once we were far enough away, he whispered, "I think I know what she's planning. And if I'm right, you're not just in trouble with the HOA. You're about to be in trouble with the law. Serious trouble." Before I could ask what he meant, a police cruiser pulled up beside us. 2 officers stepped out. "John Miller," one asked. "Yeah? You're under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon." My stomach dropped. From the corner of my eye, I saw Karen standing in the HOA office doorway, holding her phone up, recording. And smiling. The cuffs clicked shut around my wrists with a cold, metallic finality that made my stomach churn. One deputy read me my rights while the other patted me down. I kept looking over at Karen, still standing in the HOA doorway with her phone, filming every second, smiling like a predator that's finally cornered its prey. "Assault with a deadly weapon?" I repeated, my voice cracking with disbelief. "What weapon? What are you talking about?" The taller deputy kept his tone flat. "We'll go over that at the station. Right now, you're coming with us." Mark Henson, the PI, took a half step toward me, like he wanted to say something, but Karen shot him a glare that froze him in place. I caught his eyes though, and in them I saw something I wasn't expecting: guilt. They shoved me into the back of the cruiser. From that vantage point, I saw Karen wave mockingly as we pulled away. She mouthed something I could read even through the glass. Game over. At the station. Inside the sheriff's department, they booked me, mugshot, fingerprints, the works. Then they led me to a small, stale interrogation room. No windows. Just a table, 2 chairs, and a flickering fluorescent light. An older detective named Barnes came in, sat down, and slid a file across the table. "You know a man named Gary Willis?" "No," I said immediately. "Never heard of him." He opened the file and turned it toward me. Inside was a photo of a middle-aged guy with a bloodied head wound. "According to a sworn statement, this man says you attacked him on the trail behind your cabin with a crowbar last night." I blinked at him. "That's insane. I was home all night. Alone. That's not what the witness says." Barnes slid over another page, a signed affidavit. "The witness? Karen Thompson. She claims she saw you chasing him, swinging the crowbar, yelling that you'd teach him a lesson for trespassing. She even gave us a description of the weapon." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how perfectly twisted it was. "And I suppose she just happened to have her phone ready?" Barnes leaned back. "Funny thing. She says her phone died before she could record the incident. But she did provide." He opened a manila envelope and pulled out a crowbar, smeared with what looked like dried blood. "This. Found near the trail, about 50 feet from your shed." I knew instantly what was going on. The same way she planted stolen tools behind my shed, she'd planted this too, except now she had a supposed victim to go along with it. Holding cell. After hours of questioning, they threw me in a holding cell. There were 3 other guys inside, 2 drunk locals and 1 wiry man in his 30s who kept staring at me. "You the guy Karen's after?" he asked finally. I looked up, startled. "You know her?" He smirked. "Everyone in this county knows her. She's ruined more lives than I can count. HOA president, best friends with a county commissioner, and somehow always squeaky clean. I had a buddy, same thing happened to him. She planted stuff, called in favors, next thing he knew, he lost his house." "What happened to him?" I asked. The man's smirk faded. "He's gone. Sold the place for next to nothing and disappeared. Some folks think he moved away. Others, he trailed off, shaking his head. Before I could press him, a guard came to the bars. "Miller, you made bail." The bail. Out in the lobby, I expected to see a family member or maybe my lawyer. Instead, it was Mark Henson, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. Don't thank me, he said when I approached. I didn't do it out of kindness. I need you out of there so we can deal with this before it gets worse. Worse? I scoffed. She's already framed me for assault. Mark leaned in, his voice low. John, this isn't just Karen. That guy she says you attacked? Gary Willis? He's not random. He's her cousin. And he's got a record: assault, petty theft, fraud. The whole thing's staged. But they're not after just your property. They're after something else you've got. I frowned. What? Mark glanced around, lowering his voice even further. Your land backs onto an unregistered parcel. No HOA control. Word is there's a corporate buyer who wants it bad, and Karen's the one greasing the wheels. Once you're out of the picture, it's hers to sell. I froze. And she's willing to destroy my life for it. Mark nodded grimly. You have no idea how far she's willing to go. And if we don't move first, you won't get another chance. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp. In the distance, I thought I saw the same car from before, Karen's silhouette barely visible in the driver's seat. Mark noticed it too. She's watching to see if you're broken yet. I clenched my fists. Not even close. But deep down, I knew the game had just gone from bad to deadly. Mark's old pickup truck rattled as we drove away from the sheriff's department. The mountain road was empty except for the steady hum of his engine. I could still feel the phantom weight of the cuffs on my wrists, and my mind replayed Karen's smile over and over, like she was already celebrating my destruction. All right, Mark said, his voice steady but urgent, we don't have much time. She's going to push the DA to file charges before the end of the week. Once that happens, you're tied up in court for months, maybe years. You'll burn through money, and she knows it. I stared out the passenger window. So what's your plan? He hesitated, then glanced at me. I was hired to dig into your life. I did. There's nothing worth a second look. But in the process, I also dug into hers. That made me turn my head. And? Mark smirked slightly. Let's just say our dear HOA president has a few skeletons in her walk-in closet. Some small, some, the kind that could put her away for good. Digging for dirt. We drove straight to Mark's office, a cramped little space above a feed store in town. The place smelled faintly of old coffee and dust. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, and the desk was buried under stacks of manila folders. Mark pulled one out and dropped it in front of me. Inside were photocopies of property records, old newspaper clippings, and, most interestingly, police reports from nearly 20 years ago. Karen Thompson, Mark began, wasn't always Karen Thompson. Her maiden name was Karen Willis. That's right, same as Gary, the guy she says you attacked. They've been pulling scams together for decades. HOA power trips are just the latest. He pointed to a faded clipping. The headline read, "Local woman escapes charges in alleged insurance fraud." She and Gary staged a break-in at her own house, filed a claim, then sold the stolen items under the table. Charges were dropped because witnesses disappeared. I flipped through more pages. Bank foreclosures, eviction notices, even a lawsuit from a former HOA treasurer accusing her of embezzlement, all either settled quietly or dismissed. Every time, she walked away clean. How's she doing this over and over? I asked. Connections, Mark said simply. And fear. People who go against her either lose everything or vanish. The plan. Mark slid a fresh folder toward me. If we want to take her down, we need two things: proof she staged the attack, and proof of her bigger scam. One without the other won't stick. And how do we get that? He leaned back in his chair. By getting Gary to flip. He's the weak link. Records show he's been in and out of rehab, has debts all over town. She controls him, but he's not loyal, not if someone offers him a better deal. I thought about it. So we find Gary, get him talking, but he's not just going to hand over a confession. Mark grinned. That's where you come in. You're the guy he supposedly hates. But if you show up with the right bait, he might just sell his own cousin out. Setting the trap. 2 nights later, we put the plan into motion. Mark learned Gary liked to drink at a rundown bar on the edge of town called the Rusted Antler. The place looked like it hadn't changed since the 70s, flickering neon, warped wooden floors, and a jukebox that skipped every other song. I walked in alone, my heart pounding. Gary was easy to spot, same bruised forehead from the attack, same mean eyes. He was playing pool with a couple of rough-looking guys, a half-empty bottle of beer on the table. When he saw me, his whole body tensed. "You got a lot of nerve showing your face here," he growled. I raised my hands. "Relax. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to talk business." He laughed bitterly. "Business? After you tried to cave my head in?" I stepped closer. "You and I both know I didn't touch you. And I also know Karen's not going to give you squat for what you're doing. But me? I can pay. Cash. All I need is the truth. He narrowed his eyes, studying me. What truth? That she set me up. That the whole thing was staged. You give me proof, I make it worth your while. Enough to pay off your debts, maybe even disappear for a while. Gary glanced at his buddies, then back at me. I could see the wheels turning. You got 1 hour, he said finally. Meet me behind the bar. And bring the money. I nodded and walked out, my pulse racing. This could be it, the break we needed. But as I rounded the corner of the building an hour later, ready to meet him, I froze. Gary was there, lying face down in the dirt, not moving. And standing over him, was Karen. She was holding a phone to her ear, speaking softly. When she noticed me, she smiled. John, she said sweetly, you really should stop following people. It's dangerous out here. The sound of sirens was already approaching. The sirens grew louder, bouncing off the trees like a warning from the mountains themselves. Karen stood over Gary's limp body as calm as if she were watering flowers in her garden. Her phone was still pressed to her ear, her tone syrupy sweet. Yes, officer. I'm here at the back of the Rusted Antler. I just caught John Miller standing over my poor cousin's body. I think he might have, she let her voice tremble, finished what he started the other night. My chest went cold. This was happening again, the same playbook, the same smirk. I took a step forward. Karen, you're out of your mind. I came here to... She raised a hand like a schoolteacher shushing a child. Careful, John. The more you say, the deeper you dig. The police arrive. 2 cruisers screeched into the gravel lot, headlights washing over us. Officers jumped out, hands on their weapons. Step away from the body, one shouted. Gary groaned faintly, which was the only thing that kept me from being cuffed right there. One officer knelt to check his pulse while another questioned Karen. She told her story like she'd been rehearsing it all day, how she just happened to be passing by when she saw me lurking behind the bar, how Gary cried out, then collapsed. Every detail was delivered with perfect, fake compassion. She even put her hand over her heart for emphasis. When they turned to me, I told them the truth, about Gary calling me, about the deal to talk. But without proof, it sounded thin. Mark to the rescue. Just when I thought they'd haul me in again, Mark's truck came rumbling up. He hopped out, holding his phone. Before you cuff my client, he said to the nearest officer, you might want to see this. He played a grainy but clear video, Karen standing over Gary minutes earlier, alone, holding what looked like a small syringe. She bent down, jabbed it into his arm, then let him slump to the ground. The officer's face tightened. Where'd you get this? Security cam from the feed store across the street, Mark said smoothly. Lucky for us, they've got a wide-angle lens and a clear view of this alley. Karen's smile faltered for the first time all night. But Karen isn't stupid. Still, she wasn't the type to panic. She simply laughed, tossing her hair back. Oh, come on. That video proves nothing. Could be a pen, could be anything. And why would I hurt my own cousin? Gary groaned again, but didn't wake. The officers exchanged glances, clearly unsure. One of them muttered something about needing statements from both sides. Karen knew she'd bought herself time. I'll be happy to come down to the station, she said brightly. After all, I've got nothing to hide. The bigger picture. On the drive back to my cabin, Mark's jaw was tight. She's dangerous, he said flatly. That syringe? Bet you anything it was a sedative. Keep Gary quiet so she can control the story. I shook my head. Why go this far? Why not just take my land the easy way? Mark shot me a look. Because this isn't just about land anymore. I've been digging deeper. You know that unregistered parcel behind your property? Turns out it sits on an old survey map labeled Mineral Rights Dispute, Confidential. The words hit me like a slap. Minerals? You're saying there's something valuable, Mark cut in. Could be gold, lithium, whatever. Point is, someone with the right connections could make millions. And Karen's not just working alone. She's tied to a developer out of state who's been sniffing around this area for years. The message. That night, back at the cabin, I found something wedged under my door. A plain white envelope with no name. Inside was a single Polaroid photo of me, asleep in my bed. Scrawled in red marker at the bottom. Go back to the city. Or you won't wake up next time. I stood there staring at it, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This wasn't just intimidation. This was a promise. Mark walked up behind me, saw the photo, and his face hardened. She's telling you she can get to you anywhere. Which means, he looked me dead in the eyes. We stopped playing defense. We hit her first. The Polaroid still lay on my kitchen table when the first light of morning slid across the cabin floor. I hadn't slept, every creak of the old wood made me reach for the baseball bat leaning against my chair. Mark had been pacing all night, phone in hand, calling in favors from contacts I didn't know he had. This is it, he finally said, slamming his coffee cup down. We're going to burn her whole operation to the ground in one hit. I raised an eyebrow. You've got a plan? Mark's grin was tight and dangerous. Oh, I've got more than a plan. I've got bait. Operation Smoke Out. By noon, the bait was set, a fake property deed showing I was selling my cabin, plus the mysterious, unregistered parcel, to a shell company. The papers were placed where Karen's little network of HOA spies would be sure to find them. Within hours, Mark's burner phone buzzed. An anonymous voice, we both knew it was one of Karen's messengers, wanted to meet in a warehouse outside town to discuss terms. Terms was just code for we're going to take this from you one way or another. Perfect. The warehouse trap. We arrived just before sunset. The place was exactly what you'd imagine, a hollow steel shell with rust bleeding down the walls, the kind of place where people vanished. Karen was there, flanked by Gary, looking much more sober now, and 3 other men I'd never seen before. She had the fake deed in her hand and that infuriating smirk on her face. Well, well, she said. Looks like you finally learned your place. Just sign over the rest and maybe you'll make it back down the mountain alive. I took a slow step forward. Funny thing about deeds, they're only worth something if the county clerk's office recognizes them. And this one? Well, Mark clicked a small remote in his pocket. Suddenly, the far wall lit up with the blinding glow of headlights. 3 unmarked SUVs rolled in. Out stepped 2 state investigators, a county sheriff, and, to my surprise, a man in a suit from the Attorney General's office. Karen's smirk evaporated. The evidence. The lead investigator held up a thick file. Karen Willis, aka Karen Thompson, we have a warrant for your arrest on charges including fraud, conspiracy, witness tampering, and assault. We also have statements from multiple witnesses, including your cousin Gary. Gary's head dropped. Sorry, Karen. They offered me a deal. I'm done taking the fall for you. Karen's face twisted into something feral. You little. But before she could finish, the sheriff stepped forward and cuffed her. The collapse of a queen. They searched the warehouse and found more than we'd hoped, forged HOA documents, hidden cash, even a locked case full of unregistered firearms. It was enough to connect her to the developer Mark had mentioned, and enough to freeze all transactions on the disputed land. For the first time, I saw Karen without the armor of her confidence. She looked smaller somehow, the mountain queen stripped of her crown. As they led her past me, she hissed under her breath, "This isn't over." I met her gaze. "It is for you." Aftermath. Weeks later, the town was buzzing with the fallout. Karen's arrest had exposed a web of corrupt HOA officials in 3 different counties. The developer pulled out of the area entirely once the mineral rights investigation went public. The cabin felt different now, not because it had changed, but because it was mine again. No more constant fear of knock on the door. No more wondering if I'd wake up to find my life gone. Mark stopped by one evening, handing me a cold beer. You know, he said, you handled yourself pretty well for a guy who almost got railroaded twice. I laughed. Guess I had a good detective. He raised his bottle. And you've got a cabin worth more than you thought. Just, maybe don't tell too many people about the minerals. Epilogue. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about Karen's last words. Maybe she'll try something from behind bars. Maybe not. But now, I'm ready either way. Because I learned something on that mountain, when someone tries to steal your home, you don't just defend it. You take the fight to them.